The house was quiet, but beneath the surface, tension was building. For weeks, she had noticed the changes: the late nights, the cold distance, the unfamiliar scent on his clothes. She kept silent, pretending not to see, but inside, her heart was breaking. Tonight, something was different. As she prepared dinner, her mind was racing, but her hands were steady. He came home, like any other night, unaware of the storm waiting for him. She greeted him with a calm smile, though behind it, a dark plan was forming. He sat down, unaware that this night would be the turning point. Every word, every movement felt heavy with an unspoken truth. He didn't know it yet, but the silence between them was about to explode, and nothing would ever be the same. Priya, a young woman from a modest family, believed she had found the man of her dreams in Ravi. Handsome and successful, he swept her off her feet. Their wedding was a grand affair, symbolizing the start of what Priya thought would be a life filled with love and happiness. As months passed, Priya began noticing subtle shifts in Ravi's behavior. He became increasingly distant, spending more time at work or on his phone. His once affectionate demeanor turned cold, leaving Priya confused and worried. Whenever she asked, he would brush off her concerns, blaming his demanding job for the late nights and lack of attention. One day, while Ravi was in the shower, Priya's suspicions got the better of her. She went through his phone and found messages that shattered her heart. Ravi was having an affair with a woman named Maya, someone he had met through work. The messages revealed a deep emotional connection and passionate exchanges, leaving Priya devastated. Priya confronted Ravi, hoping he would apologize and make things right. But instead of remorse, Ravi became angry. He denied the affair at first, then admitted it only when Priya presented evidence. Yet, his cold response shocked her. He showed no guilt, only frustration at being caught, and even blamed Priya for the downfall of their marriage. Heartbroken, Priya fell into despair. She isolated herself from friends and family, trying to figure out what went wrong. Meanwhile, Ravi grew bolder, no longer hiding his affair with Maya. He moved in and out of their house as he pleased, showing little regard for Priya's feelings. The marriage was crumbling, but Priya wasn't ready to give up. Priya's sadness soon turned to rage. In her mind, Ravi and Maya had destroyed her life, and she could no longer stand the betrayal. She sought advice from a close friend, who warned her against acting on her anger. But Priya's pain had consumed her, and she started plotting her revenge. She began researching poisons and ways to cover up a crime, believing that ending their lives was the only way to free herself from this nightmare: the murder. The fateful evening began like many others, with Ravi coming home late. His clothes smelled faintly of perfume, and the smug look on his face told Priya everything she needed to know. He had been with Maya again. Despite the storm of emotions raging inside her, Priya remained calm. She greeted Ravi with a smile that masked her inner turmoil. "Let me make you a drink," she said softly, guiding him to their dining table. Ravi, unsuspecting of what was to come, nodded and settled into his chair. He barely noticed Priya's trembling hands as she prepared his favorite whiskey on the rocks. But this time, the drink wasn't meant to relax him. It was meant to kill. Priya had spent days researching the perfect poison, one that would be tasteless and undetectable until it was too late. She had sourced it from a black market dealer online, ensuring there would be no direct trace to her. As Ravi took the glass, Priya watched him closely, her heart pounding in her chest. Every sip he took felt like a step closer to justice. For a moment, doubt crept into her mind. Could she really go through with this? Was she prepared to become a murderer? But then she thought of Maya, the woman who had stolen her husband, and of Ravi's betrayal, the lies, the coldness. The anger bubbled back up, replacing the doubt. "How was your day?" Ravi asked absent-mindedly, barely looking at her as he swirled the glass, taking another sip. "Quiet," Priya replied, her voice steady, though inside she was anything but calm. Within minutes, Ravi's face began to change. He paused, blinking rapidly, as if trying to clear his vision. His hand, holding the glass, began to shake, spilling the remaining whiskey on the table. What? What did you—" Ravi's words slurred as his body reacted to the poison, his breath quickening and eyes widening in terror. He dropped the glass, clutching his chest as pain coursed through him. Priya stood still, watching coldly as he struggled for breath. He collapsed from his chair, crashing onto the floor, convulsing as the poison took its toll. His face turned pale, sweat beading on his forehead, and his eyes pleaded with Priya for help. "Why?" he gasped, his voice weak, barely audible. Priya knelt beside him, her face close to his as she whispered, "For everything you did to me." Ravi's body jerked violently one last time before he fell still. His eyes were frozen in shock, staring at nothing, and his mouth hung open in a silent plea for mercy. But it was too late. Priya remained kneeling next to him for several minutes, her mind reeling with what she had just done. A mix of emotions washed over her: relief, guilt, sadness. But most of all, an overwhelming sense of finality. Ravi was dead. There was no going back now. Maya's arrival. Priya didn't have time to process her actions before she moved on to the next part of her plan. She picked up Ravi's phone and sent a message to Maya, pretending to be Ravi. The message was simple: "Come over. We need to talk." Maya, oblivious to the danger that awaited her, arrived at the house an hour later. Priya had already cleaned up the scene, dragging Ravi's body into the guest room and locking the door. When Maya knocked on the door, Priya opened it with a calm expression, her face betraying none of the horrors that had unfolded just moments earlier. "Where's Ravi?" Maya asked, stepping inside, her voice laced with suspicion. Priya smiled coldly. "He's here," she said, her tone eerily calm. "But we need to talk first." Before Maya could react, Priya pulled a knife from her pocket, the same one she had hidden earlier in anticipation of this moment. In one swift motion, she lunged at Maya, who barely had time to scream before the blade plunged into her chest. Maya stumbled backward, her hand clutching the wound as blood soaked through her blouse. She gasped in shock, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. Priya stood over her, her face expressionless, her mind numb to the violence she was committing. "You ruined everything," Priya hissed, her voice filled with venom. "You took him from me." Maya fell to the floor, her breathing labored, her life slipping away as Priya watched. It was quick, much quicker than Ravi's death. Within moments, Maya lay still, her lifeless body sprawled across the floor, blood pooling around her. Standing over the bodies of the two people who had torn her life apart, Priya felt an unexpected emptiness. She had thought that killing them would bring her peace, that their deaths would somehow heal the deep wounds in her heart. But instead, all she felt was a cold, hollow void. She looked down at her hands, now stained with blood, Ravi's, Maya's, and metaphorically, her own. The weight of her actions began to sink in, and for the first time, Priya felt the crushing weight of what she had done. She wasn't free. Instead, she had trapped herself in a prison far worse than the one she had lived in with Ravi's betrayal. There was no turning back now. She would have to face the consequences of her actions. But in that moment, standing alone in the silent house, all Priya could think was that she had lost everything. Her husband, her dignity, her very soul. The house was eerily silent after the murders. Priya stood motionless, surrounded by the wreckage of her life. The bodies of Ravi and Maya, the blood that stained the floors, and the suffocating air of death. She had envisioned this moment for so long, rehearsing the satisfaction of seeing them both pay for their betrayal. But now, staring at the tragic aftermath, she felt nothing. No relief, no triumph, only an overwhelming void. The hollow silence of the room mirrored the emptiness inside her. Everything she had done, all the anger that had fueled her actions, now seemed distant and meaningless. Hours passed, and Priya remained rooted to the spot, too numb to process the enormity of her crime. The clock ticked away as the house grew colder, the daylight fading into the darkness of night. The bodies lay still, a grim testament to her rage, while she drifted in and out of a dazed stupor. She moved through the house like a ghost, her mind detached, as she tried to clean the bloodstains. She wiped down the surfaces, but her efforts felt pointless, futile, like trying to erase something that was permanently etched in her soul. Every drop of blood was a reminder that there was no turning back. The thought of what would come next lingered in the back of her mind, but Priya felt paralyzed. She hadn't planned for this part. The murders, the moment of revenge, had consumed her every waking thought for weeks. But now that it was done, she felt lost, unsure of what to do. It was as if her entire world had collapsed into this single act of violence, and now there was nothing left. No future, no escape. She sat on the couch, her hands still trembling, staring at the door as if expecting someone to walk in and drag her out of the nightmare she had created. By morning, the outside world began to catch up with her. Ravi's colleagues grew worried when he didn't show up for work, and Maya's friends noticed her sudden silence. Calls were made, and when neither Ravi nor Maya answered their phones, suspicions grew. The police were eventually contacted. Priya knew it was only a matter of time before they came for her. She didn't bother running or hiding. Where would she go? What was there left to live for? The sound of sirens in the distance didn't startle her. She heard them faintly, growing louder as they approached the house. Still, Priya didn't move. She remained seated, waiting for the inevitable. When the knock came at the door, she stood up and opened it, her expression vacant. The officers looked at her with a mix of confusion and concern, but she offered no resistance as they entered the house. They didn't need to ask what had happened. The scene spoke for itself. Ravi's body was found slumped in the guest room, Maya's on the floor, surrounded by the blood that had pooled from her wounds. The air was thick with the stench of death. The police quickly realized that Priya was the only one left alive. As they led her outside, the neighborhood was beginning to stir, the flashing lights drawing attention. People gathered, whispering in shock and horror. But Priya paid them no mind. She felt detached from everything around her, as though the world had shrunk to a dull, gray blur. There was no panic in her, no fear, just a grim acceptance of what was to come. At the station, the questions began, but Priya remained silent. She sat in the cold, sterile room, staring at the floor as detectives tried to get her to speak. They showed her pictures of the crime scene, of Ravi and Maya's bodies. But her expression didn't change. She had already confessed in her heart, long before the police arrived. The real punishment had started the moment she took their lives. There was no escape from the burden of what she had done. Priya, consumed by guilt, accepted her fate without resistance. After being arrested, she sat in silence as the weight of her actions sank in. Though she had sought revenge, she found no peace, only emptiness. In the end, she realized that by killing Ravi and Maya, she had destroyed not just their lives, but her own. Now, imprisoned, she faced a lifetime haunted by the irreversible consequences of her choices. In the end, Priya's story is a tragic reminder of how betrayal can push even the most loving heart into darkness. What began as a desperate search for justice turned into a spiral of violence that left everyone broken, including Priya herself. Her actions, driven by pain and rage, led to a hollow victory with no redemption. Now, forever imprisoned, Priya's tale stands as a cautionary lesson of how unchecked anger can consume a life, leaving only regret in its wake.